Grace was always a simple woman. After her husband's death, she carried the weight of the household on her own, working as a housekeeper to support her daughter, Hannah. Although her life was marked by hardships, Grace never complained. All that mattered to her was Hannah's future. She wanted to see her daughter grow up strong and well-educated. But as the years went by, something began to change in the girl's heart. Watching her classmates with brand-name clothes, modern cell phones, and wealthy families, Hannah started to feel ashamed of the life she led, of who her mother was, and what she represented. When Hannah went off to college, the distance between them grew. She met different people, young adults from rich families who fascinated her with their luxurious and carefree lifestyle. To keep up appearances, Hannah began taking money from her mother's wallet, buying clothes and accessories to make herself seem more modern and fit in with her new friends. At every gathering, she lied about her background, making up stories to hide the poverty that Grace represented. The allure of parties and the temptation of a life far from her reality pushed Hannah further and further away from the woman who had sacrificed so much for her. Grace, meanwhile, watched her daughter slip through her fingers but didn't fully understand what was happening. She felt guilty, thinking perhaps she had failed as a mother. Every time she tried to get closer to Hannah, she encountered an invisible wall, a barrier of pride and shame that she didn't know how to break. What Grace didn't realize was that this distance was only the beginning of a long and painful separation, and her life was about to change forever. As the months went by, Hannah grew even more distant from Grace. When she wasn't at college, she spent days away at her boyfriend's house, a man of questionable character, but whose wealth dazzled her. Hannah fell in love, not with him, but with what he represented: luxury, status, and a world free from the worries of her childhood. The lies started to pile up. She would invent stories for her mother about studies and college activities, but in reality, she rarely came home. Her relationship with this man took her further away from the humble reality that Grace represented. Grace felt the distance more and more. The conversations between mother and daughter, once filled with affection, became rare and shallow. Grace noticed how Hannah would look away whenever she mentioned the difficult life they were living. There were no more shared laughs at the dinner table, only silence and quick excuses to leave. Grace didn't know how to handle the pain of watching her daughter drift away. She sent encouraging messages and left loving notes around the house, but received no response. The growing emptiness inside her was devastating. Hannah, on the other hand, was becoming more and more immersed in her new life, surrounded by friends and pleasures that made her forget the woman who had raised her. The time she spent at her boyfriend's house was an escape from the guilt that occasionally crept into her thoughts. When she thought of Grace, a lump formed in her throat, but Hannah wasn't ready to go back. The shame she felt about her mother's poverty kept her trapped in a life of appearances. And so, the distance between them grew, with Grace unaware of how lost Hannah was in a world that seemed glamorous but was, in reality, empty. Tired of the silence and her daughter's absence, Grace decided she needed to do something. She felt that if she didn't act, she would lose Hannah forever. One day, without warning, she took a bus to the city where her daughter was living and went to the apartment she knew belonged to Hannah's boyfriend. Grace's heart raced as she walked through the streets, holding tightly to the worn-out purse she'd had for years. When she rang the doorbell, she hoped that this gesture might bring her daughter back to her. Hannah opened the door and stood still for a few seconds. Her face shifted from surprise to discomfort as she looked her mother up and down. Grace, with her simple clothes and tired expression, seemed out of place in this world of parties and appearances. "What are you doing here, Mom?" Hannah asked coldly. Grace, trying to keep her composure, responded with a shy smile. "I wanted to see you, honey. It's been so long." But before she could continue, Hannah, embarrassed by her mother's presence in front of her friends and boyfriend, quickly sent her away. The confrontation was inevitable. "You don't understand, Mom. My life has changed. I can't live in that poor, simple world anymore. I can't stand it." Hannah vented, her voice full of pride and shame. Grace's heart broke in that moment. All she wanted was to have her daughter back, but she realized that Hannah was determined to push her away. With tears in her eyes, Grace said nothing more. She just turned and walked away, wandering the city streets with a heavy heart. She knew that in that moment, she had lost more than just a reunion. She had lost the daughter she loved so much. The days became a lonely routine for Grace. Her house, once filled with life when Hannah was there, now felt empty and silent. The phone never rang, and the loving letters Grace still wrote to her daughter went unanswered. She threw herself into work, filling the empty hours with simple tasks. But the void left by Hannah was undeniable. Grace kept moving forward, but she felt that something inside her had broken. Although there were no more arguments or explicit hurts, the silence between mother and daughter was a constant pain. Meanwhile, Hannah was sinking deeper into a life of luxury and excess. Her boyfriend had introduced her to a circle of influential friends, exclusive parties, and endless nights of fun. Hannah barely thought about her mother or her old simple life. The easy money, brand-name clothes, expensive dinners, and the attention she received kept her from reflecting on the past. The freedom she had always desired was now within reach, and she was enjoying it to the fullest, without considering the consequences. Caught up in this new life, Hannah made reckless choices, not caring about tomorrow. The luxury and glamour blinded her, and any concern for her family or what was right seemed irrelevant. She was convinced that her future would be as bright as the present she was living. However, by surrounding herself with people driven by power and self-interest, Hannah failed to realize that she was moving further away from what truly mattered. She lived as if the world was her playground, not noticing that her escape from reality was leading her down an increasingly dangerous path. Grace's life was marked by simplicity and hard work. For years, she worked as a housekeeper and caregiver for Mrs. Virginia, an elderly and generous woman whom Grace cared for with dedication and affection. Despite all the difficulties of life, Grace always had respect and admiration for Virginia, and the two developed an almost familial relationship. But one day, Mrs. Virginia passed away, leaving a void in Grace's heart, after years of being by her side. Just a few days after the funeral, Grace was surprised by news that would change her life forever. In an extraordinary gesture of gratitude, Mrs. Virginia had left Grace an inheritance. A beautiful house and a significant amount of money ensured that she would never have to work as a housekeeper again. For Grace, it felt like a dream. After so many years of struggle and sacrifice, she could finally rest and live in comfort and dignity. Her life had changed in an unexpected way, and Grace felt a mix of gratitude and relief. However, this new life soon caught the attention of someone Grace didn't expect to see so soon: Hannah. One afternoon, while walking through the mall, Hannah spotted her mother from a distance. She couldn't believe what she saw. The woman she had always associated with poverty and humility was now dressed elegantly, walking confidently, part of a world Hannah never imagined her mother would belong to. Surprised and curious, Hannah decided to investigate what had happened. When she visited her mother's old home in the simple neighborhood, she heard from neighbors about the inheritance Grace had received. It stirred something in her, and Hannah felt compelled to reconnect with her mother, driven by curiosity and the new status her mother now represented. Hannah couldn't shake the image of her mother from her mind. Grace's transformation was unbelievable. The humble woman she had avoided out of shame now seemed to be living a life of comfort and stability. Motivated by curiosity and a secret desire to take advantage of the new situation, Hannah decided to seek out her mother. After getting the address of Grace's new house from relatives, she showed up unexpectedly, trying to hide her intentions behind a forced smile. When Grace opened the door and saw Hannah, her heart filled with hope but also caution. She was happy to see her daughter, but something about Hannah's behavior made her suspicious. Hannah entered, discreetly admiring the beautiful house that Grace had inherited from Mrs. Virginia. The elegant furniture and air of stability were exactly what Hannah had always wanted. But Grace, carefully watching every move her daughter made, began to sense that something was wrong. The conversation between them seemed superficial, and Grace realized that Hannah's return was not motivated by love, but by interest. Still, Grace didn't voice her suspicions. She was happy to have her daughter back, even if only for a moment. A silent sadness grew in her chest because she knew that the reason for the visit was probably not what she had hoped for. Hannah, on the other hand, spoke softly, trying to hide the real reason for her reunion. The house, the money, the comfort, it all seemed within reach now. She imagined that over time, she could convince her mother to share part of the fortune, believing that her change in attitude would be enough to guarantee her a share in this new lifestyle. Days went by, and Grace watched every move Hannah made. Her daughter seemed willing to reconnect, but something in her behavior didn't feel genuine. Grace, now wiser from life's experiences, decided to test her daughter to see if this change in attitude was real. During a casual conversation, she mentioned the possibility of dividing the inheritance she had received, pretending to be open to sharing her fortune with Hannah. Hannah's reaction was immediate. Her eyes lit up, and for a brief moment, she seemed unable to hide her excitement. Grace, who knew her daughter well, saw through the mask. Hannah's responses, filled with exaggerated gratitude, only confirmed her suspicions. She spoke in a rehearsed manner, showing a fake interest in helping her mother and being part of her new life, when, in reality, all she wanted was the money. Grace, who still held on to the hope that her daughter had changed, felt the weight of disappointment in her chest. The test revealed the truth, but Grace, heartbroken, chose not to confront Hannah right away. She continued to observe, hoping that, somehow, her daughter would realize the mistake she was making. But gradually, Hannah revealed her true intentions. She casually mentioned that she was interested in the inheritance, carelessly talking about how the money could help her life. Every word she said only deepened Grace's pain, as she wondered when her daughter would stop focusing on material things and return to being the girl she had raised with so much love. Grace had her suspicions, but nothing could prepare her for what she was about to hear. One afternoon, while Hannah was at home, Grace heard a sound coming from her daughter's room. Curious and worried, she slowly approached the half-open door and overheard Hannah talking on the phone with her boyfriend. Her voice was low, but the words were clear and devastating. "He needs money," Hannah said urgently. "One of his deals went wrong, and he lost everything. He's desperate, but I'm almost there. My mom is falling for it. Just a little longer, and I'll get what he needs." Grace froze. Each word was like a dagger to her heart. The daughter she had raised with so much love, the same daughter she had hoped had changed, was now plotting to take her money, not out of her own need, but to help her boyfriend in illegal business dealings. Hannah, unaware of her mother's presence, continued the conversation, explaining that she was almost sure she would get the money soon, convincing Grace that she wanted to start her life over with her. The brutal truth was revealed. Hannah had changed completely, becoming someone Grace barely recognized. The disappointment and disgust overwhelmed Grace. The young girl she remembered was gone, replaced by someone manipulative and unscrupulous. Grace backed away from the door, her heart heavy, feeling more betrayed than ever before. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she held them back. Now, she knew there was no more room for pretense or tests. It was time to confront Hannah and expose the truth she had been trying to hide. Grace's pain was palpable, but she knew she had to be strong, even if it meant losing the last connection she had with her daughter. That night, dinner at Grace's house was wrapped in heavy silence. Hannah tried to act normal, but her uneasiness was obvious. As Grace set the table, her mind raced with the conversation she had overheard earlier. She knew her daughter was involved in something dark, and every anxious gesture Hannah made only confirmed her suspicions. When they finally sat down, Grace looked directly at her daughter, her heart broken but resolute. "Hannah, we need to talk," Grace began, her voice calm but filled with a quiet pain. "I heard your conversation with him this afternoon. I heard everything." Her words fell like a bomb at the table. Hannah froze, the silverware slipping from her hands. The lie she had constructed so carefully was unraveling before her eyes. "Why, Hannah? What have you gotten yourself into?" Grace continued, sadness filling every word. "How could you choose such a dark path to succeed? What happened to the girl I raised?" Hannah, terrified and cornered, tried to keep her composure. "Mom, I can explain. I just wanted to help," she began, but her shaky voice and inability to make eye contact betrayed her. Grace shook her head, already knowing it was just another excuse. "Don't pretend to care about me anymore, Hannah. You didn't come back for me. You came back for the money. You've always wanted the inheritance, but now I know it's worse than that. You're involved in something wrong, aren't you?" Hannah's face turned pale. She knew there was no way out anymore. Grace's pain was immense, but she stayed strong, looking at her daughter with the kind of strength only a mother can have in moments of deep disappointment. Before Hannah could respond, there was a loud knock at the door. The police had arrived. While investigating Hannah's boyfriend for his illegal business deals, the police had discovered her involvement in his activities. The confrontation at dinner was cut short by the officers entering the house to arrest her. Hannah didn't have time to argue. As she was taken away by the officers, she looked at Grace, finally feeling the weight of the wrong choices she had made. Everything was falling apart around her. The life she had built on lies and deceit had come to an abrupt end. Regret finally began to set in, but now it was too late. Hannah was handcuffed and taken away while Grace watched, devastated, but knowing it was time for her daughter to face the consequences of her actions. The cold, narrow cell was now Hannah's new home. The sound of the iron doors closing echoed in her mind as a constant reminder of her choices. Sitting in the corner, hugging her knees to her chest, she felt the weight of reality crashing down on her. Everything that had once seemed so important, the easy money, the status, the glamour, was now just a pile of ashes. Hannah was alone. The boyfriend who had influenced her so much had disappeared. The friends she had made at parties were no longer around. And for the first time in a long time, she felt truly lost. The long, sleepless nights in prison were filled with painful thoughts. How had she ended up here? When had it all started to fall apart? And then, the image of Grace came to her mind. The mother she had abandoned out of shame. The woman she had betrayed by trying to take her money. The person who had cared the most for her, even after everything. The regret became unbearable. Hannah realized that for all those years, she had been running away from the only thing that really mattered, her mother's unconditional love. While Hannah faced the silence of the cell, Grace continued to visit her. Even with her heart broken, Grace couldn't abandon her daughter. During each visit, she looked at Hannah with the same loving gaze she had always had, a look of love and compassion. "Honey, I will never leave you," Grace would say, holding Hannah's hands through the bars. "You made mistakes, but you are my daughter, and I love you. Whatever has happened, I'm here for you." Grace's simple, emotional words touched something deep inside Hannah. For the first time in years, she cried, not out of fear or frustration, but out of shame and regret. "Forgive me, Mom," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. I ruined everything. I betrayed you. I hurt you. And now, look where I am." Grace squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, her own eyes filled with tears. "What matters is that you're here now, recognizing what you did. Forgiveness is a long road, Hannah, but I'm willing to walk it with you." Those words, filled with love and hope, began to change something within Hannah. The cell that once felt like a prison was now becoming the place where she would start to rebuild herself. And there, in the midst of so much darkness, her mother's forgiveness was the only light that would guide her back. Within the cold walls of the prison, Hannah began to rebuild her life. Not as it was before, but with a new perspective. The regret for all her wrong choices still weighed on her heart, but she decided that this place, once a symbol of her downfall, would be where she began her transformation. Hannah got involved in volunteer work inside the prison, helping other inmates who were in difficult situations. Slowly, she began to find purpose in small actions, organizing book donations, teaching reading and math to those who hadn't had access to education, and eventually giving talks about her own story, warning others about the dangers of bad choices and influences. "I made bad choices. I let pride and greed blind me," Hannah would say in one of her talks. "But now, I want to do things differently. I want to turn this pain into something that can help others avoid making the same mistakes." Her voice was steady, but filled with emotion. The volunteer work and talks began to bring a sense of peace that Hannah had never experienced before. Although she still faced many years of prison time, she finally felt at peace with herself and the new path she was walking. Her relationship with Grace also changed completely. Grace continued to visit Hannah often, and with each visit, the bond between them grew stronger. During their long conversations, they shared memories and made plans for the future. "I forgive you, Hannah," Grace would always say, looking at her daughter with the same loving gaze she'd always had. "What matters is that you're rebuilding yourself, and I'll always be here." Grace's forgiveness had become the foundation that kept Hannah going. Her mother's forgiveness not only freed her emotionally, but also motivated her to be better every day, even behind bars. Over time, Hannah learned to live with the pain of the past without letting it define her future. Even though she was still in prison, she found ways to be useful and continue her journey of growth. And Grace's constant presence, with her visits and words of encouragement, made everything more bearable. For Hannah, her mother's unconditional love was the light that guided her, and in the darkness of the prison, she had finally found the peace she had been seeking. "Mom, I promise you that when I get out of here, I'll be a new person," Hannah said during one visit, holding Grace's hands with tears in her eyes. Grace, her voice soft and filled with emotion, replied, "You already are a new person, my daughter, and I'll always be here by your side." That moment was more than just a simple conversation between mother and daughter. It was the victory of love over pride, of forgiveness over pain. The bars of the prison might have confined Hannah's body, but her spirit was free to love and start over. Grace and Hannah had come a long way, full of mistakes, hurt, and regret. But in the end, what prevailed was the ability to forgive and begin again. A mother's love had transformed the one who was lost, and a daughter's forgiveness had given meaning to everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below which part of the story moved you the most. What would you have done in Grace's place? Do you believe in the power of forgiveness to rebuild lives? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next video, where we'll continue to bring you stories that touch us deeply.